in geologic formations and exist undisturbed in nature, whether the Earth's surface or below. However, when they are disturbed and transported by human activity to human environments, they are considered technologically enhanced naturally occurring radioactive materials. TNOR, increasing potential of exposure that may result in concentration levels above background levels. In a recent peer-reviewed study at University of Texas and University of North Texas Health Science Center, School of Public Health, and Department of Environmental and Occupational Health, soil and water obtained from reserve pits used in unconventional natural gas activities were analyzed for the presence of TNOR. Samples were analyzed for total gamma, alpha, and beta radiation and specific radionuclides. Laboratory analysis confirmed elevated beta readings, and specific radionuclides present included thorium-232 and radium-226. According to the authors, many of the radionuclides found in oil and gas runways and their constituents were not addressed by regulatory guidance documents, and negligible information is provided in determining potential of cumulative effects of simultaneous exposure to several radionuclides for potential human and animal health impacts. The study also indicated that the Environmental Protection Agency and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission do not have established federal regulations that directly govern norm waste from the oil and gas industry. Things of particular interest that when we see that fracking waste is recycled and you start to recombine over and over again these toxic chemicals and radioactive materials, that you're getting combinations that we just simply don't have any understanding of or any knowledge about. The term norm is often misused when applied to radioactive material introduced into human environments by oil and gas exploration and extraction operations. The New York State DEC improperly classifies hazardous radioactive oil and gas from related byproducts as norm instead of TNOR, which would the TNOR would require special disposal. Synergistic catalysis is a relatively new field of chemical study and is concerned with the ability of synthetic chemicals to spontaneously form new chemical bonds when exposed to sunlight, water, air, and radionuclides, or other chemical catalysts. The potential health risks of resulting compounds are unknown and pose a public health threat as mixtures of fracking chemicals, interaction of chemicals with radioactive materials, and reaction of chemicals with other contaminants under heat and pressure cause unknown synergistic reactions. In a study by Dr. Michael Schultz at the University of Iowa, his colleagues tested the accuracy of the radium measurement technique used and recommended by the EPA for analyzing radioactivity in drinking water, since studies have shown that the drinking water method is unsuitable for solutions with high concentrations of ions characteristic of fracking waste. Several methods were used to assess the radium isotopes in the sample from the Marcellus Shale, and one method, co-precipitation technique used by EPA, recovered less than 1% of radium-226, the most abundant radium isotope in the fracking waste sample. Another method, gamma ray spectroscopy, the gold standard for radium analysis, detected 91% of radium. According to researchers, the EPA method is ineffective for analyzing fracking waste. 59 scientists have attested to the fact that wastewater treatment facilities are not designed to treat chemicals, contaminants, and highly radioactive materials produced by fracking operations. Hydromide levels from fracking waste byproducts are highly corrosive to the equipment and react during water treatment to form brominated trihalomethanes linked to bladder, colon cancers, and are associated with birth defects. Once they do combine, they are difficult to eliminate from the drinking water supply. A Duke study examined water quality and isotopic compositions of discharge effluents in surface waters and stream sediments associated with a treatment facility site in western Pennsylvania, and found that elevated levels of chloride and bromide combined with strontium, radium, and hydrogen isotopic compositions reflect the composition of fracking waste from the Marcellus Shale. Downstream from the treatment facility, concentrations of chloride and bromide were above background levels, and barium and radium were reduced influence compared to concentrations in Marcellus shale-produced water. However, radium-226 levels in stream sediments at the point of discharge were 200 times greater than upstream and background sediments and above the radioactive waste disposal threshold regulations, posing potential public health and environmental risks of radium bioaccumulation in areas of shale gas wastewater disposal. We've already discussed the assumptions that the oil and gas industry enjoy from tracking and properly classifying hazardous waste materials, and the enormous tonnage of fracking waste that is being imported from Pennsylvania. 300,000 tons has been noted by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. The leachate from those landfills is going to wastewater treatment plants that are ill-equipped to process the hazardous chemicals and radioactive materials in this waste. Vehicles transporting hazardous radioactive fracking waste byproducts increase the risk of human and animal exposure and contamination of water, air, soil, and farmland when accidents, leaks, and spills occur. There's no special hazardous waste warning signs or emergency instructions on the trucks, placing first responders and residents at risk. Increased risk of exposure is posed when hazardous waste products and their constituents are used for road spreading applications, maintenance, and construction, thus control de-icing. Local governments may unwittingly be procuring processed fracking waste. Road application products may originate from processed fracking waste, underground storage of natural gas, or liquefied petroleum gas well storage operations, or fracking activities. Full disclosure of ingredients and origin of all road application products is imperative. Road spreading applications can also expose drivers and passengers, pedestrians, animals, and livestock to these pollutants as they contaminate residential areas, school properties, nearby surface waters, cropland. The radioactive particles may actually become airborne as trucks and passenger vehicles travel along these roads and can be tracked on shoes by pedestrians and tracked into homes. I'm going to just focus in about the agricultural impacts. The agriculture areas are most vulnerable to the immediate threat posed by fracking waste. Mounting evidence has shown livestock illness and death from acute toxicity poisoning from harmful exposures from external waste and reproductive problems in cows, and higher rates of stillborn and deformed calves have also been reported. Presence of radioactive materials and other contaminants in farmland and food products can cause irreparable damage and serious financial impacts. Protection of the quality and safety of food production is imperative for the health and safety of residents and to ensure consumer confidence in food production in a region that could easily be undermined if oil and gas and waste byproducts are accepted for disposal or for any purpose. I just wanted to point out a comment because the economics around this was raised, and I do cite this in the document that you have, the New York State report on children's environmental health, and this is a Mount Sinai School of Medicine's report about children's eating vulnerability. They're exposed to toxic exposures due to their small size and their immature organs and developing bodies that have a hard time eliminating toxins, they can't macrometers and so forth. And it outlines some of the staggering statistics on environmentally mediated disease in New York State. What I do want to point out that is that this comes at a cost annually of $4 billion per year to New York State. And the emphasis simply must be placed on primary prevention illuminating hazards before children and adults are exposed. Disease and dysfunction triggered by toxins can be prevented, and it is imperative that strong measures be taken to prevent harmful exposures to hazardous radioactive materials and toxic chemicals from fracking waste. We strongly urge the proper classification of fracking waste as hazardous T-norm and the prohibition of the sale, procurement, acquisition, possession, storage, handling, treatment, processing, application, and disposal of all treated or untreated oil and gas drilling waste byproducts and their constituents for any purpose, including but not limited to the prohibition of the disposal of all treated or untreated oil and gas drilling waste byproducts and their constituents, and all waste for treatment facilities, solid waste management facilities, the prohibition of their use as for any road skirting applications, construction, the prohibition of handling, processing, treatment, or storage of all treated or untreated oil and gas drilling byproducts and their constituents. The prohibition should also include any liquid or solid waste for its constituents that generated as a result of oil and gas extraction, which may consist of water, lime, chemicals, norm, heavy metals, or other contaminants, leachate from solid waste associated with oil and gas extraction activities, any waste that is generated as a result of or in association with underground storage of natural gas or liquefied petroleum gas from storage operations, and any products or byproducts resulting from the treatment and processing or modification. We commend the work of the legislators on this issue, but request firmly that most inclusive legislation be brought forth to protect the public health of the residents of New York State. This is an immediate public health crisis, and we appreciate your attention to this matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Weininger, for your very compelling testimony, and I hope that you'll stay for a moment at the table, because next we'd like to hear from Nadia Steinzor, who is the Eastern Program Coordinator, Oil and Gas Accountability Project with Earthworks. Thanks very much for being here. Look forward to your testimony.
Thank you very much for having me. Many thanks to the Senate Democratic Conference for holding this forum and for recognizing the seriousness of the issue, as well as, of course, the opportunity to speak today as part of this forum. And particular thanks go to Senators Patrick, Gibson, Kruger, and Bella for sponsoring bills to address very real and current risks of oil and gas field waste. Founded in 1988, Earthworks is a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting communities and the environment from the adverse impacts of mineral and energy development. We work to directly support impacted communities, document the impacts of oil and gas development nationwide, and to reform policies and regulation. And current areas of research and advocacy include health impacts of oil and gas development, as well as the enforcement and oversight aspects of regulatory agencies in various states. I'm a lifelong New Yorker and currently reside in Woodstock, and I do spend a lot of time in Pennsylvania, so I will be speaking in part about what's going on in that state and how that's impacting New York. New York has rightly delayed shale gas production within its borders because of concerns for health and the environment, concerns that are increasingly legitimized by scientific research and realities on the ground facing communities nationwide. The handling and treatment of oil and gas field waste demands the same concern and caution, and as has been spoken of a lot today, it is contaminated with salts, chemicals, heavy metals, radioactive materials, and many other polluting substances. But there is one crucial difference between the debate over fracking for shale gas within our state and the safe handling and treatment of fracking waste. Fracking waste already exists in New York, and the risks are increasing as the Marcellus shale boom proceeds along our borders. As long as New York is part of what I refer to as the fracking industrial complex and uses gas, transports it into our state, and distributes it far and wide, communities will feel the impacts. My colleague was telling us about the infrastructure development, which is another issue facing communities now in New York. Nothing exemplifies New York's involvement in this industry as much as waste products. The volume of solid and liquid waste being created through fracking operations is surging along the industry. In Pennsylvania alone, Marcellus shale drillers reported a 70% increase in wastewater generated just between 2010 and 2011, which is the latest year the figures are available, when the volume reached 613 million gallons in 1 year. 25 years ago, despite nationwide evidence of pollution from oil and gas drilling waste, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency determined that oil and gas exploration and production waste would receive a categorical exemption from the Federal Resource Conservation Recovery Act. At the time, which was obviously long before the advent of high-volume horizontal drilling, EPA stated clearly that some oil and gas waste would definitely be deemed hazardous were it not for that exemption. Since most states, including New York, have incorporated this loophole for polluters into their own oil and gas regulations, they simply have not developed systems and regulations to adequately treat waste to prevent contamination of water, soil, and health impacts. Unfortunately, this outdated and very risky state of affairs exists today here in New York. A key question before us today is whether New York, like so many other states, is going to become a laboratory for oil and gas corporations' experiments with waste. Drillers in many states are allowed to bury their waste in pits with only a thin liner between it and groundwater, creating products dubbed by residents and regulatory agencies alike as toxic burritos in the West and toxic tea bags here in the East. Pennsylvania and Texas are now pitching new products made from drill cuttings, such as road base and construction materials, and the permits are making their way through agencies to do that. How much longer will the industry be allowed to push waste problems onto the public, including New Yorkers, before it is required to find real solutions that don't harm health and the environment? And I commend you, as my colleagues have, for trying to get out ahead of this issue and prevent that from happening. According to the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, waste is currently shipped to 7 different states outside of Pennsylvania. 9 New York landfills and 6 waste management facilities are currently in the Pennsylvania database as accepting drill cuttings, wastewater, and used frac sand from Pennsylvania. No matter what drillers and regulatory agencies wish to believe about oil and gas field waste, and no matter how it's packaged and sold or exempted from laws, its toxic nature remains. At the same time, there are plenty of reasons why we should say no to more waste coming into New York. Last summer, a shipment of highly radioactive waste had to be trucked all the way from Pennsylvania to Idaho before it could be disposed of at a specialized facility. To its credit, I understand there were some facilities in New York that rejected it, as well as it is going around and around Pennsylvania looking for a home. Recent tests on water leaching from a West Virginia landfill showed spiking levels of radioactivity up to 40 times the state's clean drinking water standard. As others have mentioned, radiation detectors have triggered alarms at Pennsylvania landfills 400 times in 2008, and that was up to 1,300 times by 2012. The people analyzing the waste were on record as saying that 2/3 of such events are attributable to oil and gas field waste. A 2012 investigation by the Pennsylvania DEP found chloride, bromide, lithium, strontium, radium-226 and 228 downstream of a wastewater treatment plant in the Allegheny River, which is a drinking water supply for residents of Pittsburgh. The agency concluded in its report that the discharges were, in fact, quote, harmful to water uses and aquatic life. As Ellen has mentioned, the 2013 study by Duke University found high levels of radium salts, bromine, and metals in western Pennsylvania stream just below the treatment plant discharge. And the now famous 2011 USGS survey found medium radium levels in wastewater from oil and gas wells in New York and Pennsylvania at least 500 times the federal drinking water standards. In 2009, an analysis of flowback in West Virginia and Pennsylvania detected barium and known carcinogens such as benzene, toluene, and xylene far above the thresholds considered to be safe under the law. And just to remind us all that in 2011, in commenting on New York's draft shale gas drilling plan, EPA Region 2 said that the Department of Environmental Conservation was understating the radioactivity of drill cuttings, and it was unclear which agency was even responsible for ensuring proper controls at landfills of septic material. By ignoring the hazardous and toxic nature of the waste coming into New York and the inability of landfills and publicly owned treatment works to adequately treat it, officials are simply playing a game of roulette with the drinking water and the health of New Yorkers. Many New York counties and municipalities know this, and as been stated earlier, have decided not to gamble. Instead, they have passed measures to prohibit the acceptance of hydraulic fracturing waste at POTWs and the spreading of fracking right on roads. It is high time for the New York State Legislature to follow suit. Earthworks and its partners strongly encourage the passage of bills that have been introduced to both the Senate and the Assembly to close the hazardous waste loophole on the state level, prohibit POTWs and landfills from accepting gas and oil field waste, and prohibiting such waste from being spread on our roads. I appreciate your time and attention to these critical concerns, and once again, thank you so much for trying to get out ahead of this issue and stop it before it becomes worse. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And before we dismiss this panel, if there are some questions, I do have a question for Ms. Weininger, and it has to do with the area of treating waste as norm versus the T norm. And is it my understanding, I think I heard you say this in a prior speaker as well, that irrespective of what amount of radioactivity there may be in a waste product, if it's classified as norm, is it just completely unregulated then?
Yes, that's true. It's handled as if it wasn't removed from the shell from below the surface, as opposed to it being moved around in the human environment and transported, and perhaps, as I mentioned earlier, particularly when it's recycled or combined or going into even an impoundment, that we're getting different combinations, even if it's not necessarily recycled before it's actually removed from that impoundment pond, when it's stored in a containment tank. The same idea that we're putting different waste from different locations in quantities that are undetermined.
And it sounds like, to follow that it doesn't then become processed and concentrated, which apparently would create some level of scrutiny by using it to de-ice roads, spreading and road applications. It still is not regulated, irrespective of the amount of radioactivity. And I mention that because I in your testimony, you talked about mounting evidence revealing livestock illness and death from acute toxicity poisoning from harmful exposure to oil and gas waste byproducts. And it does seem like most of the counties that a prior speaker had enumerated were in the most rural parts of the state, and most of the rural roads then are where our farmlands are. And is it your belief that that practice of applying waste to the roadways is contributing to this mounting evidence you're talking about as potentially exposing our food supplies to health risks? Is that your contention?
It's certainly posing a great risk to farmland and to livestock, and putting them in harm's way. These are areas that are using this radioactive material for road spreading purposes. And in some cases, I know we have actually spoken with a public official in a particular town that thinks that they're not using fracking waste, that he's purchasing material that is just simply, actually homespun. He said we add water and create a slurry. Well, what is that product? That it's a salt. Where does that salt come from? He didn't know the answer. He didn't know whether it was a rewarded product that had been processed from fracking waste. He did not know the origin of the product. And he, as far as he was concerned, he was using a homemade product, which was not homemade. So that's in the best case scenario where there are public officials who think they're not even using it. Their assumption may be that if it's not rolling in on a big truck, if someone's coming on the truck and offering it, that they're not getting that they're buying some innocent product.
I think the problem is probably exacerbated this winter being so long as shortages and salt. Great pressure on communities to find alternatives, and I wonder if that may play in. Just a final question from me. In your view, if norm waste product were reclassified as T-norm, does that solve that problem in terms of the appropriate regulatory climate? Whether or not it's enforcement is a different issue, but if it was classified as T-norm, is it then regulated sufficiently so that we wouldn't be used on roads?
We don't have any regulation around that. As far as the information that we have, the EPA and the NRC do not regulate this waste in the oil and gas industry and provide no guidance on it. So I think the problem is that in New York State, it's misclassified, and if it was properly classified, there may be some framework that exists that would then require some special handling, not because it's coming from the oil and gas industry, simply that it's categorized as T-norm, but it's not. So there's a lot of information that guidance that we simply don't even have on this kind of waste, and the lack of knowledge is as egregious as the knowledge we have.
Let me just pick up on that for a moment in terms of regulatory loopholes. The quickest and best way to fix this issue would be for the federal EPA to add any exemption under the RCRA. And they do have the power to do that through an executive process as an agency. And it's one of 7 exemptions to major federal laws that the industry enjoys. But they do have it in their power to do that. Short of that, states can close their own hazardous waste loopholes, which obviously there's interest in New York to do it. And the question is often raised, would this absolutely fix the problem, or would it shut down the industry, how it would work? And as I'm sure you're aware, it would simply require that those wastes are subjected to the same testing for the 4 major qualities of hazardous waste, which is toxicity, corrosivity, reactivity, and ignitability. And if it doesn't fit those categories, it wouldn't be classified. But we would probably be catching a lot, and then we would also have more analysis and more science. So it would serve the dual purpose of just creating more knowledge and understanding of the waste, as well as perhaps over time an incentive to not be creating as much as toxic waste.
Thank you. Any other questions? Senator Latimer.
I don't have a question, but I do just want to comment, thank both speakers for providing a very substantive testimony. The thing that I was most impressed by is that you focused on science, not political science. And so much of the debate around this issue has focused not on the hard science that you've not just discussed, but have given us a significant amount of footnotes that we can go back and reference in a very concrete way. I think you made a very strong case for the hazardous waste designation. I think you made a very strong case for banning the use of the effluent, which some counties, including some of our home counties, have already done, but obviously a statewide ban would be the most important thing. And I take to heart support both the legislation that my colleagues, Senate colleagues, are advancing, and I think this helps really cast a light on something that really is unfortunately underappreciated. I think that'll be our job as senators to try to make that case. So thank you for what you've testified to today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Senator Leonard, thank you very much for your participation. Our last panel will be helping us wrap up what we've learned today and looking at potential legislative action. Hopefully we can answer the question of where do we go from here. With us we have Catherine Nadeau, Policy Director of the Environmental Advocates of New York, Roger Downs, the Conservation Director of the Sierra Club, and Bill Cook, Director of Governmental Relations, Citizens Campaign for the Environment. Thank you all very much for being with us here today. And Ms. Nadeau, perhaps we can start with you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So first and foremost, I just want to say thank you. Thank you, Senator Ryan and Senator Mattis. Senator Reimer, to the senators who joined us here earlier today, because as has been commented on, this is a really underappreciated facet of the fracking debate that's going on right now. You know, we can talk about whether or not the state should be fracking. It's, in my opinion, I cannot be moving forward with this instead of proposed, but that at the end of the day, what we've heard here over and over and over again is that we're facing the impacts one way or another. So thank you so much for your time, your effort, for educating yourselves on this issue, and for working so hard to educate your colleagues, because so many of them need to be walked through this information. So I just wanted to take a couple minutes this afternoon to talk to you about some research that we did a couple years back in Environmental Advocates. Like I said, it was for a report called Out of Sight, Out of Mind. It's a couple years old, but the information contained within has not changed one bit at this point, sadly. Basically, what I set out to do as a staff of Environmental Advocates was to just look at how is the state dealing with the waste that we're already producing from low-volume wells. How would this translate into what happens with high-volume wells, you know, and what are the repercussions and ramifications. And working with the Department of Environmental Conservation through Freedom of Information requests, what became immediately clear is that nobody has any idea that we're not tracking, we're not requiring this to be treated as you know, to any standard. And at the time, unless I were to have hopped into my 99 Nissan Sentra and followed these trucks around upstate New York, I have no way to figure out, you know, where these things are going and what's happening with the waste coming off the wells. So that kind of led us down this path of inquiry to, okay, so what do we do about this? And as has been discussed here today a lot, the hazardous waste loophole is the first thing that jumped out that needs to be closed, because at the end of the day, you know, we need, as Nadia said, some basic science on the issue. We need to, at the first step, understand what's coming out of these wells. And this applies for waste, whether it be created in-state, out-of-state, low volume, high volume. It doesn't matter. I mean, waste is waste. And we know that amongst the different types of drilling, different types of wells, you still get a lot of the same contaminants. So we started looking for, you know, what is in this waste. We went through the EC's own documents that were part of the environmental impact statement. We were doing research from information coming out of Pennsylvania, and it became really clear there too that, you know, we've got some isolated incidents of reporting of some producers that were voluntarily reporting what was coming out of their waste, but nobody's even asking the hard questions of what is really in there. And if you don't know what's in there, you certainly can't deal with it. So you know, that's one of the biggest and first problems. We know a bit more today than we did when we first wrote the report, but it's still, I mean, it still stands that, you know, we don't have information coming off of each well, we don't have information telling us, you know, how precisely the waste is changing over time. We just know that it does, based on, you know, looking at these kind of higher level studies that have been done and some of the specific self-reported incidences. So we know that, you know, we need to know more, and that's step one. And the second thing is, you know, it's pretty basic stuff. We've got hazardous waste law to protect our citizens, to protect our water bodies, and protect our communities. And we lay out in law what's hazardous waste, and if something's hazardous waste, it should be hazardous waste. We can't wave the wand of the environmental conservation law and just bless this all and consider it fine. Yet that's essentially what we're doing. It's just we're washing this with the legal process. And you know, we know that what we don't know can hurt us. We heard a lot of testimony today from folks who are far more versed in how radiation affects us all and what levels than I am. Talking to us about, you know, how much this can hurt us and, you know, what impacts this may already be having based on what's going into the landfills and coming out and leaching. So we know that there's a real threat out there. And, you know, one thing that I want to just point out in my testimony, which I said on page 4, is while it's clear that New York can't permit fracking, this aspect of the issue is going unnoticed. I just want to clarify that what I mean by that is not that we, you know, may not, the government certainly choose to move forward, but we can't. We can't based on the lack of information we have right now. We can't based on what, you know, our communities are already facing and what we're asking them to face further. So I just want to point that out too. So based on all of this, you know, we came to the conclusion really quickly that the hazardous waste loophole bill is a good bill to support, and thankfully, you all agree. These are all co-sponsored bills, so thank you. The other thing is, the bill has 34 co-sponsors at this point. Senator Golden was the most recent to come on. It's got support from both conferences and from the Independent Democratic Conference. So the fact that this is not being heard on the floor is an outrage. Earlier this session, I reached out to colleague organizations in other, who work on other issues, not just environmental stuff, trying to ask them, hey, do you guys have any bills that have more than, a majority of sponsors that, and thinking that, maybe this would be a cool way to get people together and talk about what's going on in the dysfunction at the top of the Senate. And, no. The answer I got back earlier was, I wish we were in that position. I'm like, I am in that position, but I can't get this bill. You can just talk to the floor. So, anything and everything you can do, including this forum today, I thank you for. Continue to talk with leadership about this, continue to talk with your colleagues across the aisle, because this is a bill that it's a that's come, it's a that's passed. But, it can come again. There are other bills that the Senate, that are before the Senate, and Senator Patrick, your bill, thank you very much for your work on that, and for bringing that before the Environmental Conservation Committee and forcing this issue. And sadly that wasn't reported out of committee. I would hope that the Senate would reconsider. However, getting it up there and spurring the conversation and getting this out in light is tremendous. So thank you for that. Senator Gibson has a couple of bills to keep this waste out of our landfills, out of our sewage plants, and off of our streets. And obviously that's a big component of this as well. So, thank you so much to all of you for what you're doing, and I hope that we can continue to work together to make this an even bigger issue and make sure that leadership starts taking this up too, because, there's a lot of people who, it's an election year, there's a lot of people who don't want to go out and even talk about fracking, and, I read the polls too, and I understand why. However, this is a no-brainer. This is something that's already impacting us, and it's doing so every day. So, thank you. I hope that we can continue to work this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your testimony and for working so closely with many of us in our conference. Next, I'd like to hear from Roger Downs, the Conservation Director of the Sierra Club, the Atlantic Chapter.
Thank you, Senator O'Brien, and thank you for sponsoring this forum. Thank you, Senator Patrick, for your leadership on this issue. Thank you, Senator Latimer, for being here as well. I know you've been a strong champion of this issue for a long time. I've clearly lost and said today, but I don't need to repeat it all. I wanted to start just by talking about the spreadsheet that I sent around, just to reference it. After the 7-6 vote along party lines that lost Senator Patrick's vote, there were explanations made that perhaps this wasn't really actually a problem. Once you know that this spreadsheet was certainly sent to every senator on the committee long in advance of the vote, and this information has been out there months and months beforehand. Just to explain what we did, we just went through the Pennsylvania DEP website. They have meticulous databases. They have a huge disclaimer on the front that says, we cannot verify this is actually true. This is based on voluntary reporting. But it is a system that's actually very effective, and maybe these numbers aren't completely accurate. They may be lowball. But it gives us a very good idea of what's coming over the border, and it really punctuates. We have a huge problem. Again, 300,000 tons in 2011 drill cuttings over the border, tens of thousands of barrels of liquid either spread on roadways or potentially going to those treatment facilities. Not the recent year, but certainly since 2011. So that claim can be made. Catherine went through the bills, and obviously we supported them. Thank you for introducing them. I think there are several different ways of going about tackling this issue. But clearly, they're not going to go anywhere unless we get Senate leadership engaged. And I want to punctuate, I'm repeating Catherine, when we have 34 co-sponsors on a bill, we have bipartisan support, and you have an IBC allegedly controlling part of the floor calendar, it is completely inexcusable not to get the hazardous waste removal bill on the floor. When you read the EC documents, when they're talking about justifying why they are allowed in drill cuttings to be disposed of in landfills, they constantly reference, as an afterthought, we're also bound by regulatory exclusions that wouldn't allow us to handle this hazardous waste anyway. As if somehow to justify their mischaracterization of norm. And I want to get back to that because it's very nuanced in New York, and I have more to explain about norm than I think was said already. But I think this is good. We have 16 days left in session. There will be a lot of pressure on this. I want to caution you, I fear that there may be a series of bills that will get re-emphasis. And I think they're problematic. A few years ago, when we were pushing again on the hazardous waste loophole bill, Senator Versanti rather earnestly put together 5 bills. I didn't put it in my testimony, but they are S 6891 through 6895. 5 bills that essentially, in his mind and staff's mind, dealt with the issue, from instituting tracking to disposal bans, road spreading bans. But I think the key element to remember is that he chose to delineate, he would put a ban on high volume fracking waste, not low volume. And I think it's problematic for 2 reasons. One, they define high volume as a process that uses 300,000 gallons of water or more, which is the DEC, most recent DEC definition. Even though for the past 6 years under the de facto moratorium, they've been defining or approving gas wells that use 80,000 gallons or less. So there's this huge gap between 300,000 and 80,000. There's been no environmental review. We don't understand where they came up with 300,000 number, and Versanti's now codifying it. We don't approve of that, and I think it makes each of these bills counterproductive. But as other speakers have said, there may not actually be an appreciable difference between low volume fracking waste and high volume fracking waste. A lot of it depends on formation, but there's also a lot of scenarios, especially in Pennsylvania, where waste is being recycled, is touted as being recycled, that we may say high volume waste recycled into a low volume well. And then from that low volume well, it is completely washed of any regulatory oversight under these 5 bills. So I would caution you, if you know, obviously you have to work with the chair, you have to work with the vice chair. If they bring these bills forward, talk to them about removing the high volume definition and moving forward with standard treatment of waste rather than having 2 regulatory standards with a chasm in between. And I think that we talked about closing the hazardous waste loophole. I would just like to say that I think we really do need legislation to tackle this norm issue, naturally occurring radioactive material. It's very confusing, and I'll say that New York State has a completely different definition than the EPA, Pennsylvania, and the rest of the country. And so I want to make this very clear because it is unclear, and I have to admit my testimony didn't make it much clearer, but I will lay it out right now. DEC, at least through the recent permitting decisions in the Highland landfill and Chemung landfill, have been calling norm, defining it as naturally occurring radioactive material that is both processed and condensed. Now, in Pennsylvania, that's actually the definition of T-norm, and then they have other longer definitions that pertain to public health and look at how T-norm affects water. So essentially what they're saying is that this rock, I think generally when people think of norm, they think of a rock that you can find on the ground that may have a slight radioactive signature. It is unreasonable to suggest that a rock that was once